Alrighty, welcome pilots of the Emperor's Hammer TIE Corps to episode 7 of the TIE Pilot Podcast. Jack, it's great to be back with you. We've been apart for a couple episodes.
Yeah, likewise.
So everybody, as usual, I'm with Commander Jack Wynand, and tonight, to delve a little more into the history of the EH, we have with us a former executive officer, a former member of the High Court of Inquisitors, and a current board member of the Emperor's Hammer, Sector Admiral Maverick. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Oh, great to be here, guys.
So like I said, we wanted to delve a little bit into the past. I don't know a whole lot about what it's like being on the board. So why don't you just start us off with how old were you? How old are you now? How old were you when you joined up? And just talk a little bit about your career, I guess.
All right. Well, I'm 37 now, and I joined the Emperor's Hammer at the ripe young age of 12. And it was, it's one of those things that is burned forever in my memory. So it was May 12th, 1995. My dad had been talking for a while about he wanted to buy a computer with a CD-ROM drive and this brand new operating system known as Windows 95. And he bought it for my mom. Mother's Day coincided with their wedding anniversary. And we're getting the computer set up. And this was an era where there was actually a GUI interface that looked like a library before you could even get into Windows 95.
I remember that.
Which was something that I spent a good many months learning how to disable because it was annoying. And as part of this, my dad, we were walking in like Office Max. And he was like, well, we're going to get this new computer and it's got a CD-ROM drive. I was like, what games would you like to get? And I eyed a copy of TIE Fighter CD-ROM. I was like, I want that. So I get set up, start playing, and like many people within the Emperor's Hammer, I beat the game fairly quickly. And I was like, there's got to be more to this. And exploring on AOL, AOL being America Online for those who don't remember what AOL stood for.
Yeah, the discs make good coasters.
They were fantastic. And I stumbled upon the Emperor's Hammer. And I can't remember which specific page, because it wasn't the main page. It was one of the squadron pages. And that led me to I started out asking questions like, hey, how do I get this battle? And then it was, well, how do I install a battle? And how do I navigate Windows 95? And that led, one question led to another. And it was, hey, we have an AOL chat room. Why don't you come hang out in our chat room? So my emphasis was focused on how do I get more out of my gaming, and just fell into joining. So my original post was Delta Squadron on Wing 1 of the Sovereign.
Wow, that is old school. It's funny, when I joined, I didn't even know that TIE Corps had custom battles, period. I played the game, and I was just like, I want to be with other nerds. That's pretty much the extent of it.
Yeah, and it was, as a 12-year-old, my internet time was limited. So it wasn't something where I could just sit down and, completely nerd out. I kind of had to convince my parents on, well, the reason I'm talking to these, supposed adults, because my mom assumed that anyone I was talking to online clearly was like a 33-year-old, fully engaged adult, when in reality, most of the Emperor's Hammer were kids my age.
Yeah, I was 14 when I joined.
Yeah, and I believe you joined
in 2000.
In 2000, so I was 17 then. And so I convinced my mom, the reason I'm doing this is because you spent money on this video game. And don't you want me to get more value from this video game? So I'm not asking for more video games. And my mom said, well, yes. Of course I don't want to pay more for video games. Yes, you may do this. So I'm trying to remember I'll give you a bit of a tributary story to this. When I first joined on AOL, I needed to make a login name, and my login name was Mark Hamill at AOL.com. So
That wasn't taken?
it was not taken.
Wow.
So I think if you go way back in the newsletters, and if you happen to find like an old roster, my first email address is probably markhamill at AOL.com, which had a funny side story about all the people who thought I was really Mark Hamill, and there are some fans that send very inappropriate things to Mark Hamill. So I got rid of that. But
That's funny.
So my engagement early on, like I had no idea what I was doing within the Emperor's Hammer, and I had a commander. I think it was Sithspawn or Savage. It was an S. I do remember that, and he was engaged. He talked to me. I may have been one of just a few people within Delta Squadron at the time who were responding to emails, but he, I believe, got HCI'd, High Court of Inquisitors, and he got booted out. I don't remember the reason why. But I found myself suddenly commander of Delta Squadron with no idea what that meant. And I resigned to Wynand himself.
So what year was this when you became a commander?
Somewhere in 95, 96.
Wow, that's pretty fast.
And I had no idea what to do. I mean, I was way over my head. And I kind of gravitated more into the infiltrator wing. I liked X-Wings. I always loved X-Wings as a
rebel scum.
Well, I had my Imperial leanings. I had my loyalty. But an X-Wing fighter compared to a TIE fighter, at least in the way TIE fighter as a game was set up, had an advantage.
As in the lack of shields?
Yeah, exactly. So I found myself more engaged within the infiltrator wing, and I spent most of my learning time there. And the Emperor's Hammer would have on Sunday nights, at least I recall it was Sunday nights, on AOL, they would have their weekly meetings, and Wynand would lead those meetings. And as you can imagine, it was a free-for-all text area. But I started to know more of the people, and as I got to know, Jack, who was the Grand Master at the time, Dantes, who was one of the higher-ups in the infantry wing, I started to make friends. And to understand my background, at 12, I was bullied. I was a bullied individual. I liked Star Wars. I liked Star Trek. I was smarter. Got fairly good at grades. All the stereotypical nerd elements that made up an individual. And here I found this organization, this club, where those shunned pieces of knowledge were lauded. I was like, hey, you're answering all these trivia questions. Here's an ISM. I was like, I just got a medal for knowing Star Wars trivia?
I remember when those chats used to be the IRC chats, which I think were Saturday or Sunday morning.
Saturday
the chats, they were just wild, man. They had to moderate it sometimes to shut.
Oh yeah. And people on IRC who would change their names or would send in certain things to try and disrupt them. I mean, that was a wild west of engagement. So
sorry, go ahead.
So once I started making friends and being recognized, I wanted to do more, and that's really what sparked a career that has spanned the last 25 years within the club.
Sorry, totally didn't realize I was muted there. So how did you go from, I guess, being more engaged in the infiltrator wing to all the way up to, I believe you were Sector or XO under Cyric or whatever the hell it is?
That's right. Yeah, so it's a wild journey. Because I gave an interview back in 2000, and I listed everything that I had been as of in 2000, and it's I put a lot down there. So so how I'll try and give you the most streamlined story because there was a bit of nepotism that happened in the Emperor's Hammer early on.
I mean, it is the Empire, so.
Where basically if you were friendly with someone and that person was trying to start a subgroup or was engaged in a subgroup, you kind of got a job. So I was, my career really started taking off in the infiltrator wing, and it was with Green Squadron. So the fear had just opened up. I was in Green Squadron, moved into a commander position of Green Squadron. I think I may have been in silver or red before that. But that's where Wrath noticed me. So Wrath was in Black Squadron, but Wrath was newly promoted to being commander of Praetorian Squadron. And he saw my activity, he saw some of the scores I was putting up and said, hey, how would you like to come and be in Praetorian Squadron? And I was like, gosh, an elite squadron? You're asking me? Again, feeding into that, here was a 12, 13-year-old boy who had some bullying issues. Being
I would like the elite squadrons were sort of an old folks' home.
Not whenever they were still young. They definitely got there. You're not wrong. And Omega Squadron specifically was kind of the retirement home for former officers.
I remember when I joined the XO, it was Compton, and then he retired to, I believe, Omega Squadron, and was that it basically became an old folks' home because I know it was just a bunch of people who idled on IRC and nothing else, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I still talk to Compton frequently. I was talking with him on Facebook just this evening. Really great guy. Yeah, he's in software development. Where I went from Praetorian Squadron, so Praetorian Squadron, that being in an elite squadron got you noticed. Wrath at that time, shortly after that time, was expanding and wanted to create a house within the Dark Brotherhood. So he wanted to open up House Scholae Palatine, HSP.
That's the clan I was in. Small world.
So what Wrath did was he basically picked from the intelligence division, mostly Praetorian Squadron people, and said, hey, come and help form this house with me, and we'll give you positions. So at the time, it was under the house you had caste. So there was like Caste Kun, Caste Queldrama, and they had like 10 people in those castes. And then there was a leader, Victor or Richter or something. But the carrot on the stick for me was come and we'll give you command of the House Squadron, which was Guardian Squadron. So at this point, I'm in Praetorian Squadron, Green Squadron, and HSP. And that's where things start to get wonky, because then it's, hey, we're starting this, the Emperor's Hammer Directorate, which was based off of Rebellion, whenever the Rebellion came out. And they were talking about how we'll set up and have muffs and grand muffs and governors and all this stuff. And I think it was Angel, who was a Commodore in the Infiltrator Wing, said, hey, you want to join? I'll make you a muff, and I'll give you a planet. I was like, sure. Didn't really do much with it. Come and be in the corporate division, and I was trying to teach myself HTML. So I made a copy of the EH homepage at the time, and whoever was the head of the corporate division said, hey, I like that. Come make our web page. So I ended up on their command staff. So it got like a
handout planets. That's amazing.
Well, it was the late 90s.
There's somebody would give me a planet. Shit.
It was Huron. Actually, I have it up. I was looking at it earlier tonight. It's the casino planet, Hiran, Hiran, in the Pirath system.
I don't even remember.
It's in the system manual. Um, so let me kind of streamline and stick with like each of the main paths. So in the infiltrator wing, I worked my way up to ultimately being infiltrator wing commander, IWCOM, and learned a lot of things, ironically, that would come into play now that I have a real world job. I'm a director of benefits and new client implementation for strategic health plans. Well, weekly status reports. How do you obtain updates from your squadron commanders? How do you understand how the different ships are operating? What are they attempting to do? It's the exact same skills you need for a real world job. Not trusting, face value. So Jammin, Jammin, who was IWCOM.
I remember that guy.
So when I was the flight officer for the IW, he was like, I don't want you to use any of the programs for web page design at the time. He was like, I want you to maintain it in Notepad, and I want you to learn the code itself. And I don't know how he did it, but he knew whenever I tried to like cheat it, and he would be like, hey, nope, go back. This is where you did wrong. But he wanted it written out in code. Well, in the real world, you get reports all the time, and you go, well, is this accurate? Did that individual who was responsible for running those numbers run it correctly? How do you fact check it? So those skills that I learned as a 12, 13, 14-year-old and were reinforced throughout my career, I immediately in the real world was like, oh yeah, this is the norm. Yes, it should be weekly. Yes, it should be at this level of detail. Yes, you should question some of these items. So to me, the Empress Hammer had real life skills that carry forward. So leaving the infiltrator wing, the Dark Jedi Brotherhood, or Dark Brotherhood, or Emperor's Hammer, Dark Brotherhood, as it's gone through the iterations throughout the years. I was with HSP when the clanning occurred. I was the first Adderley of House Clavius or Clevis Draco, HAD.
You know what? I think I was in that house. I was sitting here trying to remember what all the houses were in the clan. My DB memories are a little fuzzy, much fuzzier than my EH ones because of the split, and I think a lot of my info went to, was purged in the split. I remember the clan, but I don't remember what house.
Yeah, so if you were in CSP, there was Caliburnus, so HC. There was House Clevis Draco, HAD. And then there was House Droman Soul, HDS. So those were the three houses. And so I went from Adderley to Quaestor. I was a magistrate for the headmaster. I was a praetor for the master at arms. I ultimately became the master at arms, but that was under Zoran. And if you recall from talking with Ronan talked about the main exodus that occurred, but he alluded to several other exoduses and treacheries and betrayals that had happened, and Zoran was one of several that occurred within the fleet. And he, it's amazing as a human being, 20 some odd years later, the guy still annoys the living crap out of me. He would not break character. So
that sounds awful.
Here we are. We're talking about the Tide Corps. I'm a Sector Admiral. You're a Colonel. We've got these wonderful personas and characters that we have created in this rich tapestry of a landscape that Ronan laid the foundation for. but at the same time, we're human beings. You know, I'm Mark, you're Michael. You know, we have a reality that grounds us, and this guy just wouldn't leave the fantasy. And as he built his fantasy more and more, he did not like people that didn't adhere to that fantasy world, and he removed me. And to be, you know, transparent and an emotionally intelligent individual, yeah, I was 15, 16, 17, somewhere in that time frame of my life. You know, I had high school, I had a girlfriend, I had things that drew me away from this environment. And what was I as quick as he wanted? No, I wasn't. Was I derelict in my duty? Debatable. I would have said no. Was he within his rights to remove me? Yes. So that was a challenge. But he, you know, he has since been ejected from the club, and to my knowledge has never returned. And you know, in full transparency, if you go to the Dark Jedi Brotherhood and some of their legends that they built, they have been none too kind to that individual. And that's, you know, I think that's probably a good segue into talking a little bit about the High Court of Inquisitors, if you would like.
Yeah, I was going to sort of segue into that. Just, I remember when I was in High Court, I don't even remember who the High Inquisitor was, but I just remember that it seemed like a bunch of kind of scary, judgmental old dudes that didn't really chat much in IRC. And if I remember correctly, Rapier was security officer, and they were all just sort of were I don't know how to, like, sort of removed from the club,
Well,
for lack of a better term.
well, isn't the Grand Inquisitor, like, if in the systems manual, doesn't he live on, like, the star's equivalent of a Warhammer 40K death world?
Maybe. Because I don't remember if we actually called them the Grand Inquisitor.
I thought it was High Inquisitor.
There was High Inquisitor. There were three command officers, and then there was the Inquisitors themselves. And
Ashtar. That's where. Okay, it didn't say lived there in the systems manual, but it said one of the High Inquisitors commented that it was like imperial politics on a planetary scale because of the constant bloodletting. Truly, this is a fitting home for a Dark Jedi.
that sounds like something Paladin would have wrote.
I think it was Paladin. After you said that name, it was Paladin. When I joined, that's who it was.
Because there was Paladin, Royal. I'm forgetting the other one. The tie-in I always remember is Compton. Compton met a woman through the Emperor's Hammer, White Tiger, who was on the Inquisitors, and he married her, and they have two daughters now, living happily in California. So like I basically worked with his wife on this, and the thing to know about the High Court of Inquisitors is it started from a place of good intentions, because at the time where you had this panel of 11 judges, we were between, and this is depending upon how you want to count potential clones, we were running between 3,500 to 5,000 members. So the highest count that we had that I recalled was just north of 5,000 members.
What year was this?
So that would have been like 98 to 99 time frame.
I remember it was huge just when I joined in 2000, because it would be now for instance, I think I pretty much know everybody in the Emperor's Hammer. That's, what is there, 120, 30 roster members in Tycor right now. Whereas back then, I pretty much didn't know anybody outside of my wing unless they were especially chatty on IRC. because I spoke more in Wing Two's channel.
And that is very much the case, because with the multitude of subgroups, with the breadth of, think about the Sovereign. The Sovereign at the time had eight plus wings.
It was when I joined, it was 6 wings, and I was on Wing 2.
And then you had all the Star Destroyers, the Challenge, the Relentless, the Colossus, Grey Wolf,
Immortal.
And please, of all the officers out there, if I don't remember your specific Star Destroyer, it is not a knock against you. It's a knock against my age.
Don't worry, they'll airlock you.
I imagine as soon as this is going to be posted, they're going to come out of the woodworks and say, what about this one? What about that one? The Avenger had 2 wings focused on the Dark Brotherhood. The Infiltrator wing was running 3 ships. You had, at one point, the Smugglers Guild, the Bounty Hunters Guild, and they all had their own flavor of what you wanted to do. If you wanted to come in and you wanted to do message board run-on stories, you were most likely going to go in the Bounty Hunters Guild. If you came in and you wanted to do software development and develop the patches and make the ships and play around with the code of the video games, you were in the corporate division. If you want to be playing Dark Forces or later Jedi Knight, you Hammer's Fist or Dark Jedi Brotherhood, and these were very diverse people. And to this day, people will mention certain individuals, and I'm like, I know you've been around for a long time. I can see that, but I never interacted with you because we were just in separate parts of the fleet. And so when you're dealing with an organization that diverse, the High Court of Inquisitors was there to enforce the rules. And in preparing for this, I went back and I reviewed all the cases that I had. And there are some gems, and I am intentionally not going to speak to some of those cases because they were sensitive cases. I'll give you some of the allusions to them, but there were sexual harassment claims that were put in there. There were stalking claims that were put in there. You heard Ronan share the big bad, Dark Knight. Here was an individual who went from being a nuisance through the internet into criminal. Cyric being a New Jersey police officer, those were criminal activities.
He harassed. He was calling people at home or something like that.
He did several things. The biggest one that I recall, and Ronan touched on these in his interview, the phone calls to his personal line, engaging with his newly married wife, the sending of pornographic materials and enrollment, but I believe he also tried to sign up for credit cards in his name. I may be mistaken on that. That may have been something that was a rumor at the time, but
that is a very serious kind of fraud. Holy crap.
So you see that seriousness that was in court, where you would want to have multiple people hearing the evidence against it. But the how do I want to phrase this? The mythos of here are these inquisitors, these men in black robes, men and women in black robes judging on people. Would you like to take a wild guess what the vast majority of our cases were?
I say sexual harassment.
Okay.
Okay. Well, are these
like power?
Are you like thinking serious cases they investigated, or just frivolous, random?
What I'm asking is, of the dozens of cases that I personally heard, what do you think is the most common case type that we were hearing?
Clones.
No. Close. Clones did come into play.
I didn't think about that. That's a good one, Jack.
The most prevalent one was forged pilot files.
Oh, I should have
Yeah,
figured.
that makes sense.
So this was in an era before you had the battle launcher and the BSF system that would scan files and come back and say, hey, you manipulated your data file. So what we mostly heard was evidence of here's an individual that submitted a mission for a high score and the pilot file was edited. And you basically would look at, one, did they confess? And more often than not, when confronted, the pilot would confess and say, yes, I modified that file. So you look at it, you would see the report out that would tell you, here's the file, here's where within that file it was modified. You'd have either their confession or their reporting officer's report indicating this is what happened. And then you would impose a standard penalty. So the standard penalty for cheating at the time was a reduction back to sub-lieutenant and clearing of medals. And yes, I recognize that was extreme. But that was the way it was run at the time. That was the majority of what we did. But we and I include myself in this because at the time I think I was 17, 18. I was mostly on the court whenever I was in college, so I was getting into my late teenage years. I love the mythos. Oh my gosh, here's an admiral, or I made fleet admiral within the high court. These are well-regarded, well-respected elder officers. And in reality, we were a bunch of people that were like, all right, I'll look at maybe one cheating file a week, and maybe one a severe case. Like a severe case would be, or I shouldn't even call it severe, like a case that actually requires some thought. Someone got ticked off with someone else on IRC and started swearing or saying something derogatory in chat, and you would have to actually read through all the logs, and everyone would have a log. So it's like you would have, and this was in the age before we had bots. So this was what the intelligence division was mostly doing. They were sitting in channels logging what people were saying in case something like this happened. So you have the log from IRC, you would have an intelligence division individual or a member of the security office who did an interview and said, hey, I see that, pilot X blew his gasket. Why would they blow their gasket? Oh, well, they weren't getting along with this individual, and this had happened that you don't have a log of or you didn't see, and this is why they could have, reacted in the way they did. And the main goal was we wanted to keep a child-friendly environment within the public chat forums. So we want an apology. Hey, I blew my gasket. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. Here's what I'll do. And most often, an administrator would have banned them in the channel for a day or 2 days, depending upon how egregious the remarks were.
Yeah, I saw that happen more than once.
And you basically would say, okay, time served. You're good to go. It was the people, and these are without not dropping names, these are people that you would recognize who, they wouldn't apologize. Hey, I was ticked off. This person ticked me off. I did it. I'm not remorseful for it. And guess what? The next time they tick me off, I'm going to do it again. And I don't care what the forum is for it. I will just continue to be that individual.
That's the most Zekk response I've ever heard. Sounds exactly like something I would say.
So then where I would say the grand design of what was to be the High Court of Inquisitors started to fall apart was multi-layered. One, you automate away most of their responsibilities. When the BSF system comes in place, when the battle launcher comes in place, you no longer have a need for the High Court of Inquisitors to make a judgment to say, okay, was this something that could have been unintentionally done in creating a pilot file because we're custom editing for custom ships and all this other stuff. We automated that away. It's a yes/no situation. You submitted your file, the automated system said that you cheated, we're not going to allow you to pass go. So since we're not even allowing those to pass go and get into place, we're stopping the behavior before it's detrimental to the organization. There's a different way of handling that. You then get into what I like to call and Ronan alluded to this in his interview as well. Yes, we're a fictional club at this time. We're an imperial club. And as being an imperial club, there is a Grand Admiral who has ultimate authority over the club. And Ronan spoke about how he handled certain situations at that time. There were several situations where the High Court of Inquisitors got overruled. And we would hear a certain case and we would examine the evidence and we would come to one conclusion and we would get overridden by the command staff. And it would, in some cases, it was, nope, we're not going to be lenient. This is what they did. This is a trend of their behavior. We're done. We're not dealing with them anymore. Kick them out. Or it's, yes, this happened. Yes, this was, negative behavior or behavior unbecoming of an officer, but I'm going to grant clemency and I'm going to forgive that officer. And these are all happening in private. This is not, of all the subdivisions, of all the groups within the Emperor's Hammer, we weren't publishing reports that were transparent. We were publishing reports such as heard 12 cases, convicted 10 officers. We weren't saying, hey, here's what's the court docket. Today's court docket is going to be made up of 7 fraudulent pilot files. It's going to be made up of 3 harassment claims. It's going to be made up of 15 people running their mouths off and breaking the COCs. And once the verdicts came out, you may not have seen the verdict. And you talk about, hey, I don't see these people because they're on a whole different ship, whole different wing, whole different subgroup. So all you're hearing is, hey, I heard this person got demoted to sub-lieutenant. Gosh, isn't that severe? Or I heard that this person, I saw the logs. I was in the chat rooms. I heard one side of the story, but they're back. They're still in command. They're still doing their thing. They got clemency. What the heck? How did that happen? So in a non-transparent setup, that mythos becomes worse and worse. And there's actually, if you go to the Encyclopedia Empirica, our wiki, there's a brief article that was published by Keldorn Cochrane about his perspective on the High Court of Inquisitors, and it's basically saying, hey, your mandate has become limited. You're not transparent. You're not really able to carry out your duties. And there's a trend of individuals that have been, and very public individuals at the time, that we all expected one outcome and it didn't happen. What's the value of the court? So a few things happen with the High Court of Inquisitors. Ultimately, you get to the period where Astatine is now Grand Admiral.
I just popped myself when you said that name. Do it again.
And again, without giving too much detail, I will say it is fairly public knowledge that Astatine went through the High Court of Inquisitors more than once. He dissolved it, which is within his purview. As a Grand Admiral, he has the right to absolve that department. And there was a better way to do it. And Rapier, and I don't know if you've had an opportunity to interview Rapier about his time as security officer.
I tried, but he's very microphone shy, so he didn't want to.
Well, I will share on his behalf, and he can chastise me later. When you look at the makeup of the club, and go back to how I started this evening, I was 12. a 12-year-old's ability to filter their mouth, to handle the complex emotional engagement of individuals over a virtual environment in an era where there is not voice chat, there is not even readily sharing pictures. If you got a picture of what a real person looked like in the club in the 90s, you're like, oh my gosh, you must be rich. You have a scanner? And then you're willing to share it? Rapier tried to handle a lot of the situations one-on-one, which is what they needed. They needed a listening ear to say, hey, what's going on? Why did you lose your cool? Why did you shoot your mouth off on that forum? Like, what's going on? What's contributing to it? And Rapier took that fatherly approach to prevent many of those situations that technically could have come to the HCI and prevented them from getting to us. And that is absolutely the right thing to do, because we would have carried out our mandate, because our level of activity, how we would get recognized and rewarded, was how well did you hear a case? How well did you write a dissertation explaining, why you found someone guilty or found them innocent? So our merit was based upon actually doing our job, and we would have done that. And that's not what all those individuals needed, especially to the volume of, is it fair for a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid who makes a mistake around a pilot file, trying to do something quick because they want to be engaged in a competition, they want to support their squadron, they want to meet that expectations of their squad mates, and they make a mistake, and all of a sudden we wipe out all their accomplishments? What incentivizes that person to stay with the fleet? What incentivizes that person to say, this is still something that I want to be a part of, when I make one mistake and I'm back at the very beginning? So where I would end with that is, it was right for the High Court of Inquisitors to die. It was. We had exceeded our mandate. We were technologically obsolete. And when you look at, here are individuals that know the fleet, have been around for several years, who have run different subgroups or have been engaged in different activities, either make a more lasting contribution to the club, or go back to having fun. Go back to flying in a squadron. Go back to being engaged in one level. So let me pause there. What questions do you guys have about that aspect, or the aspects of what I've talked about, before we get into the later phases of my career and what led to the foundation of the trustees?
You know what? I hadn't thought about what you said about Rapier being sort of a listening ear. I don't even know if he listens to the podcast. I hope not. But since I've been back now for a little over a year, and I can recall, I think, only one time that I've really lost my shit on somebody in the Discord. And I'm not going to throw their name out, but anybody, I'm sure even Jack knows who it was.
I do.
But yeah, but Rapier had to, I think it was on Telegram, if I remember correctly. And I'm not even on Telegram anymore, but Rapier had to drag me into the Telegram DM and talk to me. Not fatherly, but certainly forcefully, to where I was kind of like, okay, that person was still being a jackass, but my reaction was sort of jackassy as well. Like I could have handled it in a more mature manner. It's interesting to know that Rapier hasn't changed much in 20 years, at least not his demeanor. But how did you get chosen for the High Court in the first place?
That's a great question, and
I don't even know how you get selected in the first place.
I'll fall back to my cop-out answer. It's a bit of nepotism.
I love the Empire.
It was one of those things where I knew I knew a lot of the people on it. Like I knew Paladin. Paladin knew me through my time in the Dark Brotherhood. I knew Royal, and this I'll give you a kind of one of those worthless throwaway items. You know, that was, I knew Royal from the time where he had, I hope, a fictitious marriage through IRC with one of the fewly recognized girls within the club. Alistri?
Alistair.
Alisteri.
Yep,
She was
I
with
remember her.
Clan Sato Keto CSK.
It's like Sato,
Yeah.
some bizarre Sith name.
Craft. Oh,
Oh, even better. Actually, you know what? I was Krath at first. I was every single order, actually.
um, so I knew Royal through that because I was friends with her. But it was one of those things, as you can imagine. You know, as you go through life, it's rare for someone to be active and be in a position to be active 100% of the time. So you know, I would be active, I would be engaged, and then it would be finals time, and I would have to go away for a month to prepare for finals, or it would be, hey, it's marching band season, so I'm going to be gone, you know, from 2:30 until 6 on the football field, and then every Saturday I would be at competitions. Every Friday night I'll be at a football game.
What did you play?
Trumpet.
Oh, that's awesome.
Ultimately, I was first chair trumpet, amongst other first chair trumpets, just playing first part.
I just saw a meme the other day that said, if you suck at playing the trumpet, that's probably why.
See, what I love is that when you eventually meet people in life, and my eldest child is in second grade. My second eldest child is in pre-K4. So as we've gotten to know parents, inevitably someone will mention they're a marching band, and I'll look at them and I'll be like, "You were a woodwind player. You played a saxophone." They're like, "Yeah," and they're like, "You played a trumpet." I'm like, "Yeah." And you kind of like still judge people on their stereotypes of what type of marching band instrument they played.
You know, as soon as you said trumpet, I judged you. I won't even lie.
What did you play?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing at all. I just judged the nerds from afar.
That's fair. That's appropriate. So back to your question, you know, I would leave for, you know, a month, 2 months, and then I'd be like, hey, I'm back. I have time to be engaged. You know, what's available? And what I liked about the High Court of Inquisitors is exactly one of the ultimate reasons it was doomed to survive. I was like, hey, I want to be active. I want to be engaged. I want to have an opportunity to contribute, but I want a position that is less demanding. And the High Court of Inquisitors gave that opportunity. So I do recall seeking them out, as much as I could, seeking to get onto the Court of Inquisitors.
Boy, I keep muting myself. Sorry. Okay, cool. Jack, any questions?
Not really. This was, I would say, Maverick was pretty thorough.
Right on. So tell us a little bit about your the I don't know how to describe it, the twilight of your career. And then I know you most recently rejoined, I think this year, at least. I don't know if rejoined, but at least you're in the Discord.
Yeah, so let me kind of bring you into that. So as I graduated college, so this was 2005, I had a ton of, how do I want to put it? I won't say that I had a ton of time, but in my last semester of college, you know, things were pretty well in hand. Like I was taking courses that I knew I was going to pass. You know, one of my courses was an internet only class where it was basically my job as a resident advisor, and I basically wrote a paper describing the job I did, and you know, I got my course credit. So I came back into being active, and I was I joined Cyclone Squadron on the challenge. This was whenever Bubba was the Commodore, and worked up to being Challenge Com, and had a great time. And that was the summer that I graduated, so I had nothing but free time for like 3 months, and we ran competitions, and we were blowing away the competition. And I still have all the submissions from that. That was ECR 7. I've got all those submission files still from it, and having such a blast of a time. And did that for a little while, and then I graduated. I started a new job, didn't have internet connection, so I gave up being Commodore. And this is where my memory gets a little fuzzy. I either went to becoming the CA recon officer or the command attaché for the recon office, or I became the recon officer, and I can't remember well. But what happened, and what I hope I've imparted, is as I've grown up within the fleet, I knew Ronan well, and as we moved into playing Star Wars Galaxies, I became far more active in the MMOs. So within the Star Wars Galaxy Guild, I would be talking to Ronan and Draze and others that ran that stuff when the Old Republic came out, was heavily engaged with the raiding team there. So I became less focused or less visible within the core E8, within the TIE Corps, but very heavy presence within those games. And it was around that time that Acetine, and there's a lot I can say about Acetine, and a lot that I won't say about Acetine, where whatever challenges he had manifested themselves in such a way that he felt that he was owed more, whether that's more recognition, more ownership, more control of the Emperor's Hammer, and he made his move. And we've all heard of the saga of Dark Knight and how Dark Knight was in play, and there was other members who.
Explain the Dark Knight thing, because I don't know what the hell that is. I must be missing that.
A Dark Knight. So the individual who was harassing Ronan.
Oh wait, NYTE.
NYT, yes, not.
I was thinking KNIGHT for some reason, and it wasn't clicking. Okay, I'm on board now.
Okay, so like he would continually come around. Like one of the other roles of the High Court of Inquisitors was making sure banned people wouldn't join. So we would see a lot of, hey, his ISP got submitted. Here's sub-lieutenant, random name generator. It was like, this is his ISP. We're banning him. We're not letting him go on. So Acetine makes his move, and he gets locked out. And Ronan came to me saying, here's what's going to happen. Acetine is going to be removed. We're going to promote Cyric to Grand Admiral. We're looking for someone loyal, someone that we can trust, who is committed to the organization, that will come and be the executive officer. Would you do it? And I said yes, unequivocally yes. And yes, there is an element of, isn't it great to be a Sector Admiral? And as an individual, when I was looking at the organization, I was like, I'll never be Grand Admiral. That to me, that's always Ronan. And I know we've had several other Grand Admirals, but to me, it's always been Ronan. Ronan is the patriarch of the club. But I said I could be a Sector Admiral. That's a career that I could get to. But for me, the reason I wanted to serve as executive officer was this club means a lot to me. Here I was an individual. I was bullied, and to explain it fully, I was bullied in Virginia. That's where I was born, and that's where I grew up. And ultimately, I moved to Tennessee and had a completely different life in Tennessee. Very, very social, very engaged, tons of friends, the dynamic was a 180. But here was a kid who, I had thought, and I'll be very transparent with you guys, I thought about running away because my school life and the engagement there was so detrimental to my mental health. There was a day where I literally ran out of my classroom, and it wasn't the only time, but I would run out of my classroom, and I actually ran out of the school and had walked through the parking lot almost to the street to walk away from school. And would come back. I would come back. But when I was in the Emperor's Hammer, I was respected. Even with all my noise, and there's a quote on my profile that says, "Mav, you must be one of the most sarcastic little cusses I've ever met online," from Ronan. But I had become a commander. I had led people. I had grown to lead an entire subgroup of over 100 individuals. I had made decisions that had long-reaching implications throughout the club. Like when I was emissary of the cons within the Dark Brotherhood, we passed possessions as an element that we wanted to implement into the Dark Brotherhood. And when you look at the Dark Jedi Brotherhood, possessions is instrumental to their infrastructure, and I was there at the genesis of that.
So there's actually something going on like that in the EH right now.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, one of my squadron members is doing that actually. Of course, it's still in the very, very nascent phases. And actually, he was just having some computer trouble, so hopefully he's back at it.
So where I was is, here's an opportunity to serve and to give back to the club, and I wish it had come at a different point in my life, because that was the year that I had changed jobs. I was taking on a leadership position within my company. I was moving from an individual contributor to a leadership role, and I was also getting married. So I was trying to do all the planning for the wedding, getting a new apartment, learning what it meant to lead people in a business environment, and the responsibilities of that role. I had to interface more with CMS, which is the Center for Medicare Services, which is all audits and so much fun. So I didn't get to do as much as I would have wanted to. And, it was unfortunate that, it was for a year. I do not think that I contributed as much as I wanted to. But that was at the same time that the Board of Trustees was being created. And the Board of Trustees, I was voted onto the Board of Trustees in the second year of it operating. And I still had a very active, engaged presence within the Old Republic Guild and the Star Wars Galaxies Guild. So it's not like I disappeared, but I did leave being the executive officer. But where the Board of Trustees came about was the Emperor's Hammer has gone through several attempts of people to defect. In 1995, Tau Squadron defected. And all 12 of them left. There was a defection within the Infiltrator Wing. There was a defection within, I can't even keep them all straight. But it culminated and became more impactful once we began having the databases. So the genesis of what is now the TIE Corp database, where we're submitting our reports, we're submitting our pilot files, we're keeping everyone's record in place. When people started to try and steal that from us, that was the club. We were at a point where going back to, someone defected, but we have a Word doc of the roster, so we're fine. That didn't exist. People weren't keeping those soft backups anymore. So what Ronan did is he went to the state of New Jersey and he filed for us to be a non-for-profit. And the hammer logo with the Emperor's hammer on it and the C-ish background, that is an officially trademark image for the Emperor's hammer. And we did this to give ourselves legal protection, so that if someone were to, in today's environment, if an individual who has access to our database tries to steal it, it is not just a, hey, give us back or allow us to have access to it again. We can file legal paperwork because that's theft of our property. And if you go in and read the bylaws that existed in 1994, so December 24th, 1994, as Ronan was setting up the organization, were fairly simplistic. If you read them now, these read like any other non-for-profit. There's authority.
When I looked at them, my eyes started to glaze over after a few paragraphs.
And that's not unintentional, because we need to cover who is owning the club. So the trustees, and there are several of us. So Ronan is a trustee, myself is a trustee, Rapier is a trustee, but also an officer because he is a official appointed officer running the organization. There's Ezra. Ezra was the guild master within the Old Republic. And then there's Vadley. And Vadley is a personal friend of Ronan who was there at the genesis of the Emperor's Hammer and helped Ronan as he was navigating, setting up what would be ultimately the Emperor's Hammer, but he was not highly active within the organization, to my knowledge, or if he was at a time where I was not observing that upper echelon of officers. But
was Astatine on the board, or did that pose some difficulty because he was Australian?
No, Astatine was never on the board because the board was founded after Astatine attempted his coup.
Right. I probably should have paid closer attention when you said that.
So Terrik was on the board at one point. Obrick. Obrick is a name you guys may not recognize, but he was, in essence, the individual who was running our guild within Star Wars Galaxies, who was from New Zealand. So a country was not impacting the ability to be on the trustee board.
Okay. I've never been on a trustee board, so I didn't know if that... Oh, yeah, I don't see why it couldn't happen if you're in the United States, I guess.
Havoc. So Havoc was the Sector Admiral and Executive Officer whenever I joined. And he went on to become a medic within the Old Republic. And several people have come. So, Cyric, whenever he resigned being Grand Admiral, he left the board. Obrick, whenever Star Wars Galaxies shut down, he left the board. Havoc, as Havoc retired once the Old Republic really was falling away, he resigned from the board. But several of us have been core to the board, and myself, Ezra, have definitely stayed consistent for a few years now. And again, it goes back to this was a place that helped me at a time whenever I needed stability and a place to be myself and grow. Rapier always says he'll be the person to turn the light off. My intention is, in some capacity, I'll be walking out the door with him. I want this club to exist for the next generation. So as I look in Discord and I see, young pilots, we talk about your son as a young pilot within the club. It's, there are others who are in that early teenage realm within the club. I want this to be a place for them. You can learn life skills that you learn through the fun of, hey, I'm a commander and I'm leading a squadron and we're playing games or we're playing these multiplayer games, and isn't it fun? But the MSE, which I know you guys probably look at and think, hey, that's crazy. And isn't that a ton of work? But that's the real world applications. How do I make sure people are being recognized? And we talk about that in my organization. The shadow of the leader. If you go and you recognize someone and you're not consistent, and you don't recognize everyone, and you miss someone, you're disenfranchising them. You're making it so that they don't feel that they're part of the team, that their contributions mean something. It's like the Emperor's Hammer is abounds in how do we recognize people. Legions of combat, legions of skirmish. You participate, you get recognized. People need that, and as a sidebar into 2020, which is what led me back. Here we are in 2020, where we have to physically distance from society. We're social individuals. We need those connections. And so for me, I went from being in a position where I traveled frequently to engage with clients and to manage our activity, to sitting in my home office basically 24/7. And part of that was I was tasked with leading our COVID-19 task force. So I had to coordinate our corporate response and executive updates. So I was sitting at my desk for 12 to 16 hours a day, not being able to interact with my family, not being able to go out to the dad's club and have a beer or go and do a school function. I'm sitting at my desk. I'm like, you know what? I've got a whole nother computer. I have a third monitor that, I need some social engagement. And it started very innocently. I went to Rapier and I said, hey, I've got all this free time. I've always wanted to build an X-Wing Alliance mission. Always wanted to do it. Never had the time, never had the mental wherewithal to sit down and figure it out. I was like, hey, I really want to take the courses we have in the Imperial University, but I can't from the reserve. And trustee is not yet a position defined within the hierarchy of the TIE Corp database where they could slap a trustee flag on me. I said, hey, is there any position, like an advisor position, that I could have that would give me access to the courses? And he happened to say, hey, we got the Imperial Sovereign Protectors available. Would you like to do it? I said, sure, I'll take it on. There's not any expectations placed upon me with it. It's kind of, I can do with it as I please. So most of what I've been doing is been talking to people. Talking with people, getting to know the newer members, the younger members, the older members who have grown into their own in positions, other older people who come back. You look at Firebird. Firebird Squadron is comprised of a lot of old infantry wing people. And so it's meeting friends I haven't talked to in a considerable amount of time. And just giving guidance, listening to people, offering some advice, and at the same time, cracking a few jokes and having a good social engagement. And that
recording podcasts.
Exactly. And that's kind of the heart of the club, is we fly TIE battles, we fly squadrons, we play games, but we come together and we're this group of comrades who share a similar interest that become something more. Your squad mates, and you get to have your own little quirks. Like I recently saw with Lambda Squadron with the beats and the beat references. It's like you look at the challenge and Chalkila.
I still don't get the beat thing. Could somebody clue me in? Maybe we should have Jeannie on.
I'll tell you, I'll listen to it because I'm curious what the beat thing is about too. But you build this camaraderie that becomes something more. It's like, isn't that something amazing? That is something that I have enjoyed immensely about this club, that I enjoy immensely that is still here, that when you when you look at the genesis, hey, I like to fly this video game. I want to keep flying this video game. Can we make more missions, more battles? Can we have a place for the multiplayer elements? That genesis, is simple enough, but we've grown to something that is so much more, and we continue to be that for so many more people, and that's what I love about it. That's why I'll never disappear from the Emperor's Hammer. My engagement will shift as my time shifts, but I always.
It's funny you should talk about how it develops leadership skills, because I think my first stint as a commander was Pi Squadron aboard the Colossus, and then I went to Theta, and then I don't remember, somewhere else before Sin. And you learn a lot just unintentionally. You sort of absorb it about just communicating with and engaging with people and trying to be diplomatic while dealing, trying to get 11 other personalities to mesh. And it unintentionally teaches you quite a bit.
It does, and it's one of the other things, and one of the things that was very cool in the mid-90s was how international the fleet was, and the fleet is still very international. Growing up in rural Virginia, and to give you kind of a diversity snapshot of my elementary school, there were 2 African Americans. And in 6th grade, which was the last grade within my elementary school, there was 1 Hispanic. That was the diversity that I was exposed to as a small child. And when I was in the Emperor's Hammer, I was talking to people in England, in Germany, talked with Blazer, who was in Israel, and was talking about how he turned 18 and he had to join the army for his mandatory 2 years of service. People across the continental United States. It was very eye-opening of how, one, there was this broader world, but how they approach different situations, and then trying to understand the cultural differences of how someone would respond in different situations. It broadens your mind. So you go back to the infiltrator wing as an example. Rhine and Obrist went through a phase where they, I would not say were out and out Nazism, but kind of that Luftwaffe German style, that very gray uniform style, the Iron Cross type style that existed between World War I and World War II, that they like to play up in their graphics, as well as in some of the ranks. So for a while, instead of having Rear Admiral, Vice Admiral, there was Marshal, Field Marshal, Vice Marshal. Well, engaging with someone who was from Germany, that wasn't they didn't take that very well, because it has a whole different connotation for them.
Yeah, I can't see that ending well.
So you learn, not only do you have someone who makes us be challenging to talk with, and we all know those people. There are people that no matter what they say, there's something about their tone, even a written tone, where you're like, I don't like that individual, that you have to work through. But then you add in cultures to it. You have to learn to adapt. You have to learn how to listen, and listen not from a standpoint of I'm listening to be able to talk next, but to listen and comprehend where they're coming from and to find a common ground. And you're absolutely right. Those are skills that are very hard to teach, and they're very hard to let someone learn on the fly. Like if you were in corporate America, they're not going to throw you right into those situations. You're going to have to prove yourself and try to learn to it, and it's hard to do that. Think about the old adage, I need experience to get a job, but I can't get a job to get the experience. you can get that experience here.
Wish I could put Emperor's Hammer on my resume.
So it's funny you should say that. I was talking to an individual who is a recent college graduate who is working on a resume, and I, through conversation, said, "Can I take a look at your resume?" And they were putting stuff from, Emperor's Hammer, Dark Brotherhood, but on there. And there's a way to do that, especially whenever you don't have a lot of skills. When you look at like coding language, when you look at database management, you can say those elements. You can say, hey, I managed a database and was responsible for managing the data of 12 individuals, and their weekly accomplishments and their monthly true up, and condensing that and sharing it upwards to a reporting structure. You can put those type of elements into a resume without saying, I am squadron commander of this squadron within this ship within the Emperor's Hammer Strike Fleet. And to be completely transparent, I did read an article once. There was an individual who ran a World of Warcraft guild and put that on his application to become the CIO of an organization. And he talked about the challenges of running a guild and all the elements we've talked through here around interpersonal management, and that helped him get the job. I buffer that for anyone listening. It was a small startup. It was a company that had like less than 50 individuals. I wouldn't try and get into a top Fortune 50 company solely upon your experience here. But you can't translate a lot of these elements and supplement your resume based upon your experience here.
That's awesome. Well, hey, man, we really appreciate having you on, man. This was very, very insightful, to say the least.
No, happy to be here. Are there topics or questions that you would want to dive deeper into or to ask?
I don't have one at the moment. Actually, I was just thinking earlier that Jack and I, or at least I am, I don't know if Jack has any, but I'm actually out of ideas for episode 8, unless somebody has one to suggest. But we're running at 90 minutes right now, so I think we might call it an episode.
No, I think that's great. And, thank you guys for the opportunity. This is a wonderful forum, and I hope of all of your listeners, as they take away from this, that there's a lot to enjoy within the organization. There's a lot that you can take away from it with a little creative understanding of how the things we do here apply into the real world, and that this is a safe space and a safe space to fail, which in the real world there are not many places like that.
Hey, if there's one thing I can do, it's fail.
But think about it. If you decide to become a squadron commander here and it doesn't work out, what have you lost? You go back to being a flight member.
Strangers on the internet won't validate me, though. That's the problem.
I'll validate you.
Thank you. All right, man. So, hey, what we like to do a little bit at the end of our episodes is I'm sure you can hear talking to me on Discord right now. So, I'm talking right now. If you could shut up for a minute. What we like to do at the end of the episode is we recap kind of stuff that's happened since our last episode, which I think was 2 or 3 weeks ago. I don't really think anything too big has happened, other than I know Squadrons was updated. They released the TIE Defender in the B-Wing. I haven't tried it yet. And I know private lobbies are happening a lot too, because Epsilon has this beastly sub-lieutenant, Githeran, who apparently beat the crap out of him yesterday. So he will be a lieutenant pretty shortly here.
Oh, yeah.
I know the Commodore of the Warrior resigned, Fleet Admiral Sylvius, so sorry to see you go, boss. And hopefully we'll have a replacement soon. Honestly, that's about it. That's all that's happened. And this is generally the quiet time of the year. So, yeah, hopefully we will come up with an idea for episode 8. at some point, unless Jack has anything to add.
Not exactly. Speaking of episode 8, I was actually thinking of doing a follow-up to the previous Squadrons episode, since it was literally like during that episode when we talked about like our ship choices and how we, I mentioned that I actually would like a DLC, but that they weren't planning on it. It was like a day or two later, before I'd even uploaded it, they announced that they were going to be adding in the B-Wings, so I think doing a follow-up that would make sense.
That is actually an excellent idea, especially since they just released the TIE Defender and the B-Wing, so maybe we can get Bayet and Frenchie back on here and then actually make it work this time, so all 4 of us can be on.
Yeah, and maybe I'll remember to actually call them by their Emperor's Hammer names this time around.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. Mav, your Iron Star is in the mail. I know that's the only reason you need to shut up. So, thanks for coming.
No, thanks for having me. And anytime you're looking for color commentary, I will be happy to rejoin you guys. I love the work you're doing.
You got it, man. I know Hav is our other color commentator, so we'll add a 4th. All right, guys. Everybody have a good night. Everybody out there, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.